this song's called Opinion.
Let's create a hypothetical situation. After being unhappy with the indie record label your band was signed to for 3 years, you finally find a way out of that contract and get signed to a major record label. Your new label is going to send you to LA to record your major label debut album in the biggest and most expensive studio you've ever been to yet. You've got a fragile and somber acoustic song that you're planning on recording for the album. Your band received a $287,000 advance from the label. So surely, you're going to go out and buy the most high-end, fanciest acoustic guitar you can find, right? If you're Kurt Cobain, you don't do any of that. Kurt walked into Sound City Studios in LA in May of 1991 with his beat-up 60s Stella Harmony H912. This guitar was so rugged that he used duct tape to help keep the tuners in place and used pliers when tuning the 5 nylon strings. Despite the flaws and issues that came with having 5 nylon strings on what was designed to be a 12 steel string guitar, it's been said that this is the guitar Kurt wrote the most songs on. He never brought it on stage, but it was a favorite that he always had close to him, even when on tour. I was extremely lucky recently. Thanks to a good friend of mine, I got an insane deal on the late 60s H912 that is exactly like Kurt's. The only way I could get any closer is if I played his actual Stella. In this video, we will be doing a deep dive into Kurt's Stella Harmony, and I will show mine and share my challenges with it and the story of how I got it. We will also take a little bit of a turn to explore how this guitar connects Kurt to his hero, who is an extremely influential legend in his own right. Stella was an American guitar brand that was founded around 1899 and owned by the Oscar Schmidt Company. The Stella brand consisted of low and mid-level stringed instruments. The brand enjoyed great success until the Great Depression. In 1939, Stella was bought out by the Harmony Company. It remained in their ownership until the brand was dissolved in 1974. The H912s were made by Harmony in Chicago from around 1966 to 1969. It's hard to find exactly how long they were made for, but the general consensus is that they were only in production from the mid to late 60s. Harmony was one of the first manufacturers of 12-string guitars after World War II. The H912 and H913 were recreations of the classic early Oscar Schmidt era guitars that were favored by legends such as Robert Johnson and Leadbelly. These guitars were widely viewed as 12-string Delta blues machines, with bluesmen generally tuning them down a full step or more to reduce the extreme amount of tension that the strings naturally put on the neck. If you look for a vintage Stella guitar today, the prices are generally not too crazy until you start looking for an H912. That is thanks to the association that this guitar will forever have with one of the most celebrated rock albums of all time. But how did it get there? Kurt Cobain purchased his Stella Harmony on October 12, 1989, at Edgewater Pawn Shop and Sheridan Jewelry for $31.23. We know the exact price and date because, amazingly, the receipt still exists. In his final interview with Guitar World magazine, Kurt says that the guitar is a
$20 junk shop Stella. I didn't bother changing the strings. It barely stays in tune. In fact, I have to use duct tape to hold the tuning keys in place.
It already had the 5 nylon strings on when he bought it, and supposedly, he never changed the strings the entire time he had this guitar. Between Nevermind, In Utero, and many home demos, it's kind of amazing to think that we are maybe hearing the same set of strings on every recording. As alluded to in Kurt's quote, he had several problems with this guitar, but you have to keep in mind, he had this guitar set up in a very unconventional way. When you have nylon strings on a vintage guitar that's meant to have 12 steel strings, you are going to run into problems. There's no way around it. A 12 string typically has 200 pounds of tension on the neck, while classical guitars with nylon strings have around 80 pounds. Reducing the tension level so drastically is going to be hard on what is already an old neck. When making an instrument do something it was not designed to do, workarounds are needed. As we know from his quote, he used duct tape to keep the tuning keys in place. We can see the duct tape in pictures too. He used pliers when tuning the guitar, probably because he had the tape holding them down so hard. Nylons will not fit into an H912 bridge. I can attest to that, as that happened to mine. Also, their bridges are floating, meaning that they are not glued and only held in place by the tension of the strings. This sounds weird. Trust me, it weirded me out when I first found that out. But in my research, I found that this was actually common practice for acoustic guitars of that time. It's hard to tell, but it looks like Kurt's Stella has a different bridge on it. What makes it hard to determine is that in the clearest pictures that we have of it, it's almost completely covered up in duct tape. He must not have liked that the bridge wasn't permanently in place. We can clearly see though that his tape was not touching the strings, just the bridge itself. Taping the strings would muffle and dampen the sound. Even with all the tape, it looks like the bridge is smaller than a stock H912 bridge. It'd be interesting to know if Kurt changed the bridge himself. My guess is that since it already had the nylons when he bought it, it probably also had a different bridge with slots that can accommodate the thickness of nylon strings. If this was done by a previous owner, then it would kind of be like Kurt's iconic Jaguar in a way. Super unconventional mods that were already in place when he got it. The last fret is missing on his Stella. Kurt's guitar tech, Ernie Bailey, has said that it was probably pulled because it had raised out of the slot and was buzzing. He was unsure if this was done by Kurt or if the fret was already gone when he bought it. Despite all these problems, workarounds, and Kurt's own quote about it being a junk shop guitar, actions speak louder than words. This might be the most documented guitar in Nirvana that we know for certain was used on several recordings, ranging from when he first got it in late 1989 to the In Utero sessions in February 93, and probably beyond that. But dating his home demos is an entirely different animal and subject of debate. Let's discuss the studio recordings we know that it was used on, and then we'll go on to his home demos. The first instance is 6 months after he bought it, in April 1990, at Smart Studios in Madison, Wisconsin. Kurt, Chris, and Chad were there with Butch Vig to record what they thought was going to be their second sub-pop album. At these sessions, we hear the Stella on the verses of Lithium, and most notably on Polly, which would go on to be the only track on Nevermind that wasn't recorded at Sound City. These sessions happened while Nirvana was on their Bleach North American tour, which tells us that he was traveling with the Stella, and this isn't the only instance of him bringing it on tour. We also see it here, in this soundcheck picture from October 26, 1993, coincidentally also in Wisconsin, but this time in Milwaukee. He supposedly loved having it with him on tour to play backstage and in hotel rooms. Next, we know that the Stella was used on September 25, 1990, on a solo Chaos radio show performance. Kurt debuted some new songs live on Calvin Johnson's Boy Meets Girl radio show, notably Opinion and an early version of Dumb. Opinion, Lithium, and Been a Sun from this performance are on the With the Lights Out box set. Next time it enters a studio is in May of 1991 for the Nevermind sessions at Sound City. There is a lot of debate and mystery regarding which gear Kurt used for each song, and as of now, the only two Nevermind songs we can say with confirmed certainty were tracked with a specific guitar is his Stella on Polly in Smart Studios and Something in the Way in Sound City. Something in the Way is technically out of tune. A lot of tap sites will tell you it's in drop C, but that's technically incorrect. For my Something in the Way cover, I tuned my Stella to the song itself and found that the exact tuning is drop C plus 46 cents. So it's somewhere in between drop C and drop C sharp. We don't really have an explanation for this. My guess is that Kurt wanted this in a down tuning so he could sing in a more fragile register, but his Stella was so difficult to tune that he got it to this weird off down tuning and said, good enough. Chris and cellist Kurt Canning had a hard time tuning to Kurt's guitar, and Butch has said that this was by far the most difficult Nevermind song to track. The dry and eerie tone of this old guitar on both Polly and Something in the Way is unmistakable. Given that both songs have dark underlying meanings and themes, the Stella's haunting and out-of-left-field sound play perfectly to that and adds on to the dark atmosphere for both. Next is the In Utero sessions, February 1993 in Pachyderm Studios in Cannon Falls, Minnesota. Before these sessions, Ernie did some work on the Stella. He has said that he replaced the messed up tuners with sealed Grover ones that Martin used. It added weight to the headstock, but it was one of the few options available at the time. He also has said that he likely glued the bridge in place after intonating it as best as possible. This also helped keep the side-to-side alignment. The Stella is technically on more songs on In Utero than it is on Nevermind, but is featured much less predominantly. Producer and engineer Steve Albini has said that Kurt tracked his vocals sitting down while playing what he described as a
Slightly broken acoustic guitar with very old, very dead strings.
He is referring to Kurt's Stella. Albini has explained even further that the acoustic was not mic'd up and recorded separately, but that you can hear it in some of the quiet parts of certain songs as it bled into the vocal mics. It can be heard alongside a clean electric guitar in the entirety of Dumb, and in the first and third verses of Penny Royalty. It's also in the isolated vocal track for All Apologies, but personally, I've never been able to hear the Stella on any of the final All Apologies mixes. But if you listen to the isolated vocal, it's there. I believe that I also hear it in the 2013 mix of Serve the Servants, in the left channel during the choruses. It coming in and out and being panned separately from the vocals would indicate that in this instance, it was maybe mic'd separately. They obviously didn't like it enough to keep it in the final mix, but it was brought out in that remix 20 years later. It'd be interesting to know if there are any other In Utero songs that the Stella was tracked for layering and ultimately wasn't used. That covers the ground for the Stella on Nirvana's albums. I think it's pretty impressive that this cheap junk pawn shop guitar is featured on multiple tracks on two extremely successful and influential albums. We also hear the Stella on many of Kurt's home demos, some of them being on the With the Lights Out box set, the Montage of Heck soundtrack, and others being unofficially released but out there as bootlegs. On With the Lights Out, it's heard on the before-mentioned Chaos radio show tracks, and also on the two tracks that follow it, the solo acoustic versions of Sliver and Where Did You Sleep Last Night. The beautiful and still unreleased solo acoustic version of Verse, Chorus, Verse is believed to also have been from the same tape, and the Stella can be heard on that one too. The solo demo of Rape Me on the box set also sounds like the Stella. When it comes to these home recordings, we have to do some critical listening when trying to determine what was used. Kurt's Stella has an unmistakable tone that's pretty easy to pick out, but another thing to look for is if you hear a high E string, then it's not the Stella. For example, the solo demo of Penny Royalty on the With the Lights Out box set is not the Stella. We can hear that guitar has all 6 strings. But on the other hand, the amazing and unreleased acoustic demo of Penny Royalty that also features Dave is most likely the Stella. As a quick side note, I believe that the Foo Fighters song Friend of a Friend might mention the Stella. When Dave joined the band, he lived with Kurt in his Olympia apartment on Pear Street. All the home demos we've discussed up until this point were most likely recorded in this house. In Friend of a Friend, supposedly each member of Nirvana has their own verse. This set of lyrics has been speculated to be about Dave himself, about how when he would maybe play Kurt's Stella, which was his friend's guitar. This might kind of be a stretch on my part, but the timeline adds up for when Dave was living with Kurt and for when Kurt was recording demos with the Stella at that house. On the Montage of Heck soundtrack, I think it's safe to say that it's the Stella on And I Love Her, and Frances Farmer will have her revenge on Seattle. I think it also might be the Stella on Poison's Gone, but I'm less confident about that guess. Another not so confident guess that I have is that it's the guitar on the unreleased Old Age acoustic demo. You might be wondering why Kurt got this arguably flimsy guitar to begin with, and why he stuck with it until the end of his career. I think that it's no coincidence that one of Kurt's heroes also played a 12-string Stella. Described by Kurt himself as his favorite performer, Huddie Ledbetter, who is better known as Leadbelly, was born in 1888 and died at the age of 61 in 1949. He is widely regarded as one of the most important folk musicians of the 20th century. He was known for having a huge repertoire, knowing hundreds of songs, many being traditional folk songs that are now considered classics that would have most likely been lost to time if he hadn't been recorded. One of those traditional songs is Where Did You Sleep Last Night, which Nirvana, of course, very famously covered as the finale to their Unplugged set. He has influenced musicians in every generation that came after him. Notable examples being the Beatles, Eric Clapton, Bob Dylan, Janis Joplin, and of course, Kurt Cobain. Leadbelly's nickname was the King of the 12-string guitar, due to his genius-like virtuosity on the instrument. His playing was so captivating that it even got him out of prison. In 1918, he was sentenced to a 7 to 35-year prison sentence for killing a relative in a fight over a woman. He had his guitar while in prison and wrote a song for the governor of Texas. Legend goes that the governor loved the song so much that it actually got Leadbelly pardoned. He was released in 1925 after serving the minimum 7-year sentence. A few years later, in 1930, Leadbelly was in prison again, this time for attempted homicide after stabbing a man in a fight. During this stint in prison, he was discovered by famed musicologists John and Alan Lomax. They were so taken by his talent that they started recording him after this prison sentence, which resulted in the legendary recordings and documentation that we have of him today. Leadbelly is thought to have only ever had 2 guitars. One of them was destroyed and no longer survives, but the other one that is still around is the guitar that he was most photographed with, a 12-string Stella. It is sometimes seen with and without the white pickguard. I think it's no stretch to think that Kurt was well aware of what model his hero played, saw a 12-string Stella in a pawn shop, and just had to have it because of Leadbelly. In this January 1991 picture of Kurt's apartment, we can even see that a picture of Leadbelly is taped on the wall above his Stella. It is Leadbelly's Stella guitar that Kurt jokes about being offered to buy for $500,000 during Unplugged. The detectives over at LiveNirvana.com recently discovered the details of this deal. Ron Harris of Live Nirvana spoke with the person from the Leadbelly estate that was in contact with Kurt about selling him the guitar. It turns out that even though Kurt brought this up jokingly, it seems like it was very much set to happen. The last time that this Leadbelly representative spoke with Kurt was 2 months before he died, which would set it at February 1994. Leadbelly's family didn't trust Kurt because of his reputation with drugs and smashing guitars. They wanted to meet Kurt in person in Nashville before finalizing anything. Here's a direct quote from the representative.
I was asking for $500,000 for the guitar, mostly to get the conversation started. Kurt told me he only had $375,000 in cash, and Courtney would kill him if he spent more than that on a guitar. I said I just needed the sale to be more than Hendrix's 69 Strat. That sold for $318,000 on paper, so it would be the most current valuable. Jimmy went through tons of guitars, and Leadbelly was only known for 2. The first one was completely destroyed, so this was it. I told Kurt to give me $300,000 in cash and then give me anything of his that we'd attach a $50,000 value to. I would have accepted literally anything, like a handwritten note, empty jelly jar. He offered his favorite Jag, plus his MTV award. After agreeing on a deal, I contacted Leadbelly's niece, executor of the estate, about it. She then demanded to meet in Nashville in person before selling to him. Totally blew up the deal.
The live Nirvana detectives speculate that this meeting and sale would have probably happened around August 1994, as Nirvana would have been headlining Lollapalooza, and that's when the tour went through the South. It's mind-blowing to think that Kurt Cobain, who was pretty vocal about not using expensive equipment, was about to drop $300,000 plus give away his Jaguar for Leadbelly's guitar. The irony of having purchased a similar model because of Leadbelly for $30 in a pawn shop, to spending literally 10,000 times more to purchase his hero's actual guitar only 5 years later. As a Nirvana fanboy, it's gutting to think of Kurt parting with his Jaguar, but the thought of him owning Leadbelly's actual Stella is pretty cool. Can you imagine if in the Nirvana exhibit at Mopop in Seattle today, they had both of Kurt's Stellas on display next to each other? One being the pawn shop Poly guitar, and the other being Leadbelly's. This is my late 60s Stella Harmony H912. This is the exact same model that Kurt Cobain used, the guitar that we've been talking about in this entire video. There are some variations of these guitars. There are some with different pickguards, some with different things written on the headstock, and those are still H912s, but I got really lucky with this one because it's exactly like Kurt's. I feel like the only way I could get any closer is if I played his actual Stella Harmony. Like, this must be like the same run, and it's really cool and it kind of freaks me out. On these guitars, you can usually find the serial number either inside the sound hole or on the back of the neck. And on mine, there's no serial number in either spot or in anywhere else on the guitar. So I can't tell you the exact year, sadly we'll never know, but it's for sure from the mid to late 60s because that's when these were in production. The only reason I have this guitar is because of my good friend John. So I'll tell you the story of how I got it, and a huge, massive shout out to John. Because without you, man, I wouldn't have this guitar. I'm forever grateful. So John has his own H912, and we've messaged about it before. And there was one time we were talking about his, and I was like, man, I really need to get one. I need it for Polly and something in the way for my Nevermind Tone series. I'm just gonna keep an eye out for them. And the first one I see for under 800, I'm just gonna jump on it. I'm not gonna hesitate because these are rare and they usually go for 1K or more. So if I were ever to find one like in the 800 range or less, I'm just gonna get it. Then not too long after that conversation, like just a few weeks, I think, John messages me and he's like, dude, I found this local listing on Marketplace for an H912 for $250. Do you want me to go get it and ship it to you? And when I saw that message, I was freaked out. I think I responded in like all caps. I was so excited. And I was like, go get it. I'll pay you back. That is an insane deal. So we were both really excited about this, but we were also trying to be realistic. If you've bought music gear off Facebook Marketplace before, you know that it can be kind of sketchy sometimes. Someone will say something is available, and then when you try to find a time to meet up with them, they just never respond, they ghost you. Or worst case scenario, you set up a time to go meet with them and you go there and you bring the money with you and they just never show up and you never hear from them again. Or sometimes you'll be messaging someone on Marketplace and you'll think you'll have a deal, and then you'll show up and there's someone else there and they try to turn it into a bidding war. That's actually what happened to my Randall amp. I talked to a guy on Marketplace, him and I agreed on a price, and then I get there and he's like, oh, there's someone else who also wants to pick it up. I'll let you guys talk it out. It was really awkward and frustrating situation. I ended up getting it, but that's a story for a different video. So Marketplace is always kind of a weird place to try to buy music gear. So we were both fingers crossed, we hope this happens. It might not, but let's see. Oh, and just for context, here's a detail I think I forgot to bring up. John and I are in different states. We're not close together. So I wasn't with him. He went out and got this by himself. So when John was talking to the seller, he did kind of play games with us for a little bit because he had it up for $250. And John was like, hey, I'll buy it. I'll get it from you tomorrow. When do you want to meet up? And the seller was like, I don't know. There's someone else who also wants it. They're also talking to me. Maybe we'll see. And John told me this and I was like, man, he's just trying to get more money out of it. But I don't even care at this price point, offer $300. So John did. He said, if I give you $300, will that put it on hold for me? And then the guy was like, yes, $300, I'll set it aside for you. This is the type of thing that happens when you buy gear off of Marketplace. It's almost never straightforward. So we were still a little worried that maybe the guy wouldn't show up, but John drove out and he met up with him and he got it. He sold him this guitar. And you guys are not gonna believe the condition it was in, like when John got it before he did any work on it. It is obvious that this poor guitar sat on this guy's wall for who knows how many years and wasn't touched. And we know that because look at these pictures that John took of when he got it. It's literally caked in dust, and no lie, there's cobwebs in the sound hole. I couldn't believe that. Like there were like spiders probably living in this thing. There was cobwebs in there. And I was like, man, this Stella is gonna get a completely new life on my channel. This is gonna be fun. So John put it side by side with his H912 just for fun, and what we found what was really interesting is there was a color difference. Even though these are the same exact guitar, mine has kind of more of like a gold burst or like a gold hue to it, where John's is like more orange. And if we look at this color photo of Kurt's Stella, his looks like it's more on the orange side. So between the two color-wise, John's Stella is more accurate to Kurt's. So we initially thought like maybe these guitars just came in slightly different colors, because even if you look at the backs are different too. Like mine still has that like kind of gold hue where his is orange. But then interestingly, when John was doing work on the guitar and he moved the bridge, he found that under the bridge is that same shade of orange that's on his. So that actually brings more questions than answers. So maybe these H912s all started out as like the orange color that John's is, and maybe mine was just hit with direct sunlight for who knows how many years as it collected dust and spiders. But then that means it would have to get like the equal amount of sunlight on the back too, since the back is also the same like gold color. So I don't know. I don't know what to say about the color difference. Like it would make a lot more sense if under the bridge it's this gold color, but it's the orange color. So I don't know. So not only did John find this deal and let me buy it through him and then he shipped it to me, he also did a ton of work on it because he's an excellent tech. So the seller had this guitar set up the way it was designed to be set up, with 12 steel strings. And this is Nirvana guitars, so I needed to be set up just like Kurt's to make it work for my channel. So the 12 strings came off and the 5 nylon strings came on. As I showed earlier in this video, on an H912 on their stock bridge, not all the nylon strings will fit in the bridge slots. So John filed down the G and the B string slots to accommodate the strings. He also asked if he should file down the high E slot, and I said yes, because eventually in the future I am going to put a high E string on here, because trust me, it is really weird to like purposely play with only 5 strings. Like I really miss the high E string. But for now I'm keeping it 5 so it can be accurate to Kurt's as I make these videos. An interesting thing that John found while he was setting up this guitar is that the nut is like lopsided. It's off to the left, it's not centered. So it looks like maybe someone in the past took it off to do some work on it and then they like super glued it back in the wrong place. So it's just like a funky little thing that's on my guitar. I feel like you don't see it unless you look for it, but then once you see it, you can't really unsee it. So John got it, cleaned it up, set it up with the nylon strings, packed it up beautifully, and sent it out to me, and I was ecstatic to receive it. Like I still can't believe I have this thing, it's nuts. So after I started posting about it and put my poly cover up with this, I right away got some people messaging me and asking me right off the bat like, yo, how shitty is that guitar? I bet it plays and feels super shitty. Aren't those terrible guitars? And I was really confused because that came from more than just one person telling me that this guitar is supposed to be a complete piece of shit that I'm supposed to hate playing. So I'm gonna be transparent and honest. There have been a few problems with it, I'm not gonna lie. It's nothing major, and nothing that makes me want to like not touch the guitar and say that I hate it. But something that I really want to put out there, and I want to make it very clear. These guitars were not designed for nylon strings. They were designed for 12 steel strings. So if you're going to change up an instrument and force it to do something it was not designed to do, you are going to run into problems. You just have to go into it with an open mind that, hey, I'm getting this H912, I'm going to do the Kurt Cobain thing to it, but you just have to know like there's going to be some road bumps, but they're workable. It doesn't make the guitar an absolute piece of shit. So right off the bat, right away when I got it, there have been on and off buzzing problems, particularly with the lower strings. I've been saying that this guitar is temperamental, because I don't know how else to put it. There are some days where like the E and the A strings in particular just buzz a lot, like open and probably like through the 7th fret, it'll just buzz like crazy. I'll adjust the truss rod and I'll wait for it to settle and it like won't go away. But then if I don't play the guitar for like 2 days, I'll come play it and there's no buzzing, and then it's like a cycle that repeats. Like then I'll go pick it up 2 or 3 days later and now there's like slight buzzing, That wasn't as bad as it was like the previous week, but I think that's just the neck adjusting to the tension difference. Because as I showed earlier in this video, a 12-string guitar generally has around 200 pounds of tension on the neck. And the classical guitar with nylon strings usually has around 80. That's 120 pounds of difference in tension on a neck that's already super old. And keep in mind, again, mine spent how many years just like collecting dust and spiders. So the neck is a little temperamental in that way, but it's not anything that's like a deal breaker. Like I still enjoy playing it. One day the D string was buzzing really bad in particular. So what I ended up doing is I took it out of like the technically the correct slot for the D string and I moved it to the other slot that's reserved for like the second D string if like all 12 strings were there, and the buzzing was just gone. So my D string is technically in the wrong slot. So now my string spacing is off because of it, but there's no buzzing. So it's like you gotta pick, do you want the correct spacing and it's gonna buzz? Or do you want the incorrect spacing and now your strings look a little weird, but there's no buzzing? I'd much rather have no buzzing. So I move the D string and sometimes I move it back just to see what happens and the buzz just like instantly comes back. So just one of those weird things of how this guitar is reacting to that nylon string. But something that's pretty cool is I've had no problems with the tuning stability, which I thought I would. And when John was setting it up, he was kind of prepping me. He was like, hey man, just keep in mind, tuning this might be a headache. You might strum it and have to tune it right away. And I'm not sure exactly what John did. He just like stretched out the strings really well, but I really haven't had tuning problems. Like it does give out sometimes, but like I can tune it and I can play like several songs before I notice anything slipping. So I'm really grateful for that, because like it would be a little sad if I like sat down to like record my poly cover or my Something in the Way cover and like by the second chorus like the guitar was off. That would be a bummer. So like I'm really happy I'm not in that position. This guitar can stay in tune for like not just one song but several songs. So it does have these little problems I've been running into, but it doesn't make me think this guitar is like terrible, because I'm making it do something it wasn't meant to do. I feel like the equivalent would almost be like if I took a snowmobile and I put it on the freeway in the middle of summer when there's no snow. And then I later on complained that like, wow, my snowmobile is a piece of junk. It got me from point A to point B terribly. If I did that, I can't complain because I'm forcing the snowmobile to do something it was not built to do. So that's how I kind of look at these Stellas. So I do not think this is a terrible guitar, because a lot of people have asked me if they think that I do. I think with the way I have it set up, it's definitely like temperamental, like I said before. It has a little bit of an attitude and it shows it, but overall, we have a great relationship and it cooperates with me. Another thing that's really cool that I want to point out is that the guitar just has a lot of like random like scratches and like dinged up, which on a vintage guitar, I think that's really cool. It just shows the character and just shows the age. I don't know how many hands I've been on this neck. I think that just like adds on to the mystique of the guitar, and it just feels like this guitar is like an old soul. Like a lot of it comes from the nylon strings, like sounding like so like eerie and like almost kind of dry. But like this guitar just feels like it's like seen some stuff, but it's not gonna tell you. Like in its old age, it's just gonna sit back and be like, I'm experienced. So that's my H912. I still can't believe I have it, and I don't know if it'll like ever fully sink in. Sometimes when I'm playing it, it'll just hit me, man, it's most likely that Kurt was sitting in his Pear Street apartment in Olympia with the same exact guitar model, writing a bunch of songs that ended up on Nevermind. I get goosebumps when I think about that. Like I've seen people write online that they think that his Stella is the guitar he wrote the most songs on. When you hold the same model and just like think about that, all the Nirvana songs that must have been written on this same exact model, it's just really eerie. It's really cool. Thank you so much for watching. Follow me on Instagram at Nirvana Guitars, and subscribe and check out my other Nirvana Gear videos right here on YouTube.